Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Hi, good afternoon. It's Susan Kaufman from Attitude Magazine. This is our ADHD Awareness webinar series, and we are very excited today to have Dr. Ned Hallowell join us. As many of you may know, Dr. Hallowell is a child and adolescent psychiatrist, a New York Times bestselling author, and a pretty world-renowned speaker and author in the field of ADHD. He's the author of over 18 books, has been a member of the Harvard Medical School faculty for a number of years, and we're fortunate to have him today. Dr. Hallowell will speak briefly, and then we will be answering some of the questions that you've submitted, some in advance and some now, which I'll submit to Dr. Hallowell, and you'll all be able to listen to. I do want to note that nothing from Attitude or from this webinar constitutes medical advice. This is for general background information, and we, of course, urge you to see your doctor for specific medical advice. So with that, let me introduce Dr. Hallowell and let him begin. Thanks for joining us, Ned.
Well, thank you, Susan, and let me thank Attitude, first of all, and you for the tremendous ongoing work you do to help people learn more about this fascinating condition called ADHD, and it really is a tremendous public health issue that educating people about what this condition is. It is, oddly enough, widely misunderstood, tremendous amount of misinformation out there, not only in the general public, but among the medical and mental health profession. And what you're doing, magazine issue by magazine issue, webinar by webinar, is breaking down those walls of wrong information. And it's very exciting to join you and have a chance to continue the work that you do by trying to bring what we do know to people about ADHD. I was very pleased to find out, that the more and more awareness it's growing in the public, and people are coming to destigmatize this condition so that they can talk about it openly. They certainly should be able to talk about it openly. And let me just go through the points that I listed as bullet points to introduce and then take your questions. I have both ADHD and dyslexia myself, and I wouldn't trade them for the world, because I've learned how to manage them. I think it's a tremendous mistake to think of ADHD solely as a disorder. I think of it rather as a trait composed of positive and negative qualities. What makes it so interesting is that it can lead to disaster or to triumph, depending upon how you manage it. Undiagnosed and untreated, ADHD leads to terrible outcomes. Failure in school, trouble at work, the lines of the unemployed are full of people with this trait. The prison population is full of people with this trait, people who get into many more accidents than the average person, people who are in and out of relationships, can't stay in relationships, the halls of the substance abusers and the drug addicted, all way overrepresented, suicide higher among ADHD. So if you're not aware of it, this can be an absolute miserable life, life of chronic frustration, misunderstanding, underachievement, if not incarceration or death. And you just have to know that it has the potential to lead to a terrible, terrible outcome. But on the other hand, and this is the part that people also need to know about, and they usually don't, if you get it diagnosed and if you get it treated, you can achieve at the very highest levels. We have Nobel Prize winners who have ADHD, many Pulitzer Prize winners. Most entrepreneurs have this trait. Common among people in the arts, common among actors, writers, certainly Academy Award winners, Tony Award winners, Grammy Award winners, all with this trait. It's common among hugely successful people. In my practice in New York and just outside of Boston, I have phenomenally successful people, brain surgeons, professors, Pulitzer Prize winners, people who have amassed vast wealth over their lifetimes, and in addition to these achievement laurels, these people also tend to be really nice people. They tend to be big-hearted and generous. They tend to be warm, and they tend to be very forgiving, and really can liven up a group, because they're willing to take chances. And so what's so intriguing and interesting about ADHD, which, by the way, is a terrible term. It's not a deficit. It's a wandering. If it were a deficit, it would be a form of dementia, which it certainly isn't. So we're stuck with this bad term for now, anyway. But ADHD can lead you in two extreme directions, and that's why public education is so critical. And that's really where treatment begins. It begins with education, learning what this is and what it isn't. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't want to learn about it, because they're scared of it. And, because they think it's a mark of shame. Parents and kids and adults, by the way, the biggest undiagnosed group are adults, but 90% of adults who have it don't know they have it. Imagine that. What a failure of public education. Most doctors don't even think about it. Adults with ADHD, get misdiagnosed as depressed or anxious, and they are depressed and anxious because they're failing all the time, and they're showing up at the wrong place at the wrong time all the time. That's depressing and anxiety-making, but that's not the underlying cause. The underlying cause is this state of disinhibition. The ADHD brain is less inhibited than the average brain, and if you think about that concept, the way I translate it into plain English, particularly for kids, I say, you've got, I say to a little boy, you've got a Ferrari engine for a brain. You've got a race car up there. You've got an amazingly powerful, fast brain. It's just that you have bicycle brakes. You can't put on the brakes. And if you think about it, that explains the core negative symptoms. We talk about distractibility, impulsivity, restlessness, or hyperactivity, what Russ Barkley calls the holy trinity of ADHD. Well, think of those in terms of brakes that aren't working. You can't inhibit incoming stimuli, hence you're distractible, and you can't inhibit or put the brakes on outgoing impulses, hence you're impulsive and hyperactive. So it sums up what's going on, race car brain with bicycle brakes. But turn each one of those on its head, you see, and then you can find the positive attributes. Turn distractibility on its head, and what do you get? You get curiosity. These people really care. They want to know what's going on. What's that noise? What's that person? What's going on over there? They're endlessly curious, and that's why we have penicillin instead of just a mold on a petri dish. Curiosity is hugely valuable trait that you can't teach. You can discourage it, though, which happens to these kids all the time. And then impulsivity, turn that on its head. What do you get? Creativity. If you're not disinhibited, if you're not spontaneous, you can't be creative. Creativity doesn't come on demand. You don't say it's 10 o'clock time for my creative idea of the day and, lay it like an egg. It depends upon your being somewhat spontaneous, somewhat disinhibited, somewhat impulsive, if you will. So impulsivity gone right, that's creativity. And then the third in the element, in the triad, hyperactivity, you get to be my age. I'm 62. I'm really glad I've got that. It's called energy, but so once again, it's a matter of how do you take advantage of the power. How do you take advantage of the creativity? How do you take advantage and channel the curiosity without getting tripped up by the downside, by the tremendously potential for negative events? I often say ADHD is like Niagara Falls. Until you build a hydroelectric plant, it's just a lot of noise and mist. But build the hydroelectric plant, and then you've got these phenomenally successful people. So what I'm all about in my practice, I say I don't treat disabilities. I help people unwrap their gifts. I help them build their hydroelectric plants. And that can't be done overnight. That's not a matter of a simple solution. It's a long-term process. I'm still trying to unwrap my gifts, and I will be till I die. But you get to a point where the upside really is much greater than the downside, and that's the whole point. And as I say, it begins with education. It begins with learning the full story, not just the bad parts of it, and not just the parts that you read in the press that are really wrong and misinformed. You want the balanced picture. You want the full understanding. And the more you learn about it, the more intriguing this condition gets. I often say it's preternaturally American. It's in our gene pool. If you look at who colonized this country, it was the risk takers. It was the folks who wanted to be pioneers and wanted to break new ground, literally, and it pulled for a special kind of person to come over here in the 1600s and 1700s and 1800s, and the way they got into trouble is the same way people with ADD get into trouble. So and the way they succeeded in building this amazing country was also what people with ADD tend to do. So I think if you understand it that way, you bring into the effort of unwrapping the gift, so to speak, the enthusiasm, the energy, the hope that the deficit-based model tends to expel. It saddens me deeply when I see kids just looking hangdog and dejected and head off for their tutoring session or what have you. And parents tell me that often their doctors inform them of this diagnosis as if they were telling them about leukemia, and other parents wring their hands and say, "Oh, how sad for you." Well, that doesn't help. What helps is understanding that, yes, there's a lot of work to do. Strengthening these brakes is not easy, and it takes years. It's not just a matter of taking a pill or snapping your fingers. It's a lot of work, It's no doubt about that. But the reward is tremendous, and the treatment should be multimodal. You should really sit down, and that's why it's so important to see a clinician who isn't wedded to just one approach. Unfortunately, this field is full of people who just want to stake out territory, and that's not good. Stay away from those. There's no one way. There are many ways, which is wonderful. So work with a clinician who says, we can try everything. We can try nutritional changes. We can try exercise. My friend John Rady has shown how powerfully important physical exercise is and what a tremendous benefit it confers upon your brain, and not to mention your body, of course. And someone who says sleep is important to take note of, and meditation. Sue Smalley's work and Lydia Zalewska at UCLA, the work on meditation, showing that mindfulness training can be as effective as any intervention that we've got. Again, there's not one size that fits all. There's not one. Then there are various alternative treatments. All of them need more research, but many of them I offer, with the caveat we're not sure what this will do. The listening system that's been developed, ILS, that combines exercise with filtered music, and the lens system that's a special form of neurofeedback. There's this heart math system, the M-Wave system, that's really quite amazing, training yourself to get into a different physical state helps with focus and reducing anxiety. These are all alternative, but the core treatments, education, sleep, diet, exercise, meditation, and then lifestyle changes, often with the help of a coach, learning how to get organized, learning how to plan, learning the techniques and habits of so-called executive function, learning new strategies. If you always forget your book bag, well, maybe you put a bell on it. Or, I personally used to lose my car keys, and so I put a basket next to the front door and trained myself to put my car keys in the basket. And finally it became a habit, and I never lost my car keys again. So, you can learn it. It's harder for people with ADHD to learn habits of executive function, but it can be done. It's not a hopeless case. And that's why you want to avoid the caricatures and the jokes and everything. You're just a dingbat and a ditz. These people, once they get it going, they are the movers and shakers. They are the people who change the world. So, It's not a dingbat in the ditch. That these.
Dr. Hallowell, to that
Yeah.
point, one of the interesting, we got, I can't, hundreds of very interesting questions that have been here. We won't unfortunately have time for you to answer, obviously. But here's one that I think is sort of relevant to what you're talking about. This is a man who is a 46-year-old man who's just recently been diagnosed, and he finds himself tremendously angry at, the thought of what he's been through, and angry at the diagnosis, angry at his parents for not seeking help, and angry about all the opportunities. And what's really upsetting him now, which he's asking for advice about, is he finds it very difficult to handle the judgments of the people around him who behave as if his behavior were a choice or a character flaw. And he's asking for your thoughts on how to handle that as he struggles to make those changes that come with a late diagnosis.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very common that people get what I call the moral diagnosis. You're
Right.
bad. You're this way because it's your fault. It's a character flaw. You're bad, and you should shape up. You need more discipline. And these folks have heard it from kindergarten. And when they finally understand that it's a medical diagnosis, they typically do get very angry, and it's good that he's feeling angry. That's a healthy release of you've been misunderstood and mistreated. Now, I would add that it's nobody did that on purpose, but that's not an excuse. It's a failure of education, and unfortunately, still, most teachers, most doctors don't get it, and so you get a lot of needs more discipline kind of comments and the moral diagnosis. So what usually happens when an adult gets diagnosed, there is a period of anger and sadness over missed opportunity, lost opportunities. But then gradually that subsides and gives way to excitement and hope, and then take those angry feelings, take those feelings of, why did this happen, and turn them into, well, I'm going to help it not to happen to anyone else. And I'm going to show the world, how much I can do, because believe me, you can do a lot. So have the angry feelings. It's good to work with a clinician who understands it, can hear it, validate it, but don't live there forever. You don't want to live in a place of anger and resentment forever. You get past that, and then you start taking what you've got, and instead of being buried under shame and sadness, and resentment, you start cutting a path for yourself and living the spectacular life that the race car brain will allow you to live as long as you strengthen your brakes.
That's great. Here's another late diagnosis question, which is also quite poignant. This is a man who is asking whether it's possible to develop ADHD in adulthood. He feels that as a young man he was quite organized and perhaps a bit spacey, but he recently, in the last couple of years, has developed problems concentrating, difficulty at work, and he's lost his job. And he's wondering, could he have developed ADHD at this point in his life? And if so, what is the best way to pursue a diagnosis?
Yeah, you absolutely can. It depends, sometimes the academics debate it and say, no such thing as adult onset ADD. We call that modern life. But I've seen it so many times now that someone develops these symptoms when the organizational challenges of modern life exceed their capacity to deal with them. The classic example is when a kid goes from high school to college.
Right.
Because you go from living at home with mom, who provides the structure and supervision that you need, to college that provides none of that. So freshman year, you're just lost, and you suddenly develop ADD. Well, it's not that you never had it before. It's just that your mother, usually mother, was helping you compensate and getting you to school on time, reminding you when you had a test. Another classic time is medical school. It used to be thought you couldn't get into medical school if you have ADHD. Well, believe me, I've got a ton of doctors who have it, including myself. So that's simply not true. But the organizational demands of medical school are so huge that suddenly you can't do it anymore. Your high IQ doesn't carry the day like it used to in high school and college. So yes, indeed, you can develop this as an adult. Whether you had it in a quiescent form as a child, that's up to the academics to sort out. But in terms of clinically speaking, absolutely, it can become an issue worthy of treatment in adulthood.
That's very interesting. Yeah. Here's a great question from an ADHD mom, a busy mom. She says, thanks to amazingly lucky genetics, I have 3 handsome, super intelligent, wonderful sons, all with ADHD. And we have a really hard time sticking to a schedule and keeping the household going, especially, she says, because she finds all the household mundane tasks so boring. Do you have any ideas for me to help teach my boys better self-discipline when I have such a hard time with it myself? Thankfully,
Well,
just to note this, her husband is a wonderful man, so it's a good story.
Well, first of all, I commend her on her sense of humor. She should come visit my house where I have it and my 3 kids have it and my wife doesn't. Even our dog has it, our Jack Russell. But, so you do the best you can. I think one thing is important to not have your standard to be Martha Stewart. What you want to do is help your kids to be well enough organized so that disorganization doesn't keep them from reaching their goals. In school and sports, what have you, or at home. Your house will never be, on the cover of House Beautiful. But that really doesn't matter. And what matters is just to learn to be well enough organized that disorganization doesn't keep you from reaching your goal. And that pretty much, anybody can learn. Don't expect it to happen overnight. You may have messy bedrooms for quite a while, but you want to just keep heading in that direction and keep your sense of humor with it.
That's great advice. Here's an interesting question about comorbid conditions. This is a viewer who has a son who's been on ADHD medications for 6 years, but has never been sort of classically tested, and she's wondering whether there are comorbid conditions at play and how she should go about finding the right person to test and really suss out what is going on with her son.
Sure. The best test for any of these conditions, including ADHD, is the history. So you want to sit down with a clinician who's really seen a lot of patients and can ferret out, is there depression here? Is there an anxiety disorder here? Is there dyslexia or some other learning problem here? Is there, some kind of neurological issue that hasn't been addressed, such as a seizure disorder or a sleep disorder? Sit down with a clinician who can really take a careful history. Then you can target your tests according to what the person suspects. As opposed to what usually happens, just go in and get a whole battery of tests and spend an awful lot of money that you don't need to spend and come out with not much to show for it. So the key is to find a good clinician who's seen a lot of ADD in children, or if it's in the case of adults, in adults as well, and go through your history with tremendous care, because that's where the diagnosis will rise. And then if an additional medical test is needed, such as an EEG or a blood test for thyroid function or something else, that the doctor can order that.
Do you concur? We've had previous speakers who suggested that would agree with you that finding an excellent clinician who's very familiar with ADHD is critical and very hard to do. One recommendation has been to join your local CHAD chapter and to pursue through the support groups there, finding a doctor who is very experienced with ADD. Does that make sense to you? Are there other ways to go about this?
Oh no, I think that's the best way. I mean, it really is through connection, and in this electronic age, that's not as hard as it used to be. So
right.
Join a chat room, join a CHAD chapter by all means. Join parent groups if it's your child you're concerned about. By all means, talk to pediatricians and become an expert. Read books. Unfortunately, there is a lot of wrong information out there, particularly about medications. Just a ton of wrong information. So you want to become expert enough that you can smell when someone is trying to spew wrong information, and and also and then also offer your support and what you learn to other people. And Chad is a great place to do it. I'm at the Chad meeting in San Francisco right now, and we'll be talking. But of course, I only reach a few hundred people when I do that, whereas with the internet, you can reach so many more, and with books as well. And the more we share, this clinician is good, that one, then, it has a tremendous leveraging effect, because more people get the help they need, and then the big obstacles will come crumbling down, the obstacles of shame and stigma and just ignorance.
So yeah, I think that's just critical. Here's a really practical question from another person with a good sense of humor. She says she's got in front of her a thesis for her master's degree, and it just seems like a monster to her. She's been putting it, quote, aside for some time now. And what do you suggest she do to accomplish this, what seems like a monster task sitting in front of her?
Well, you want to pluck its teeth, and the way to do that is to work with someone else. It's hard to do it alone, because what happens is you imagine the enormity of the task, and it just oppresses you. It's like cleaning up your room when you're a kid. It seems impossible, and you want to break it down into smaller bits. I say to kids, start with the left-hand corner of your room and clean that up. And with your thesis, I'd say write an outline, or just write one page. I mean, this is what I do with books. I've just finishing my 19th book, and every time I start a book, I think, holy moly, how did I let myself get into this? This is impossible. This is hundreds of pages. I haven't written a single page yet, and it's depressing. It's oppressive, and I beat up on myself, and I get into that negative place of wanting to avoid it. Ernest Hemingway had a great line. They asked him, how do you write a novel? He said, well, the first thing you do is you clean out the refrigerator. And what he meant is you'll find any reason not to do it. So with your master's thesis, if you've been sitting there kind of putting it aside, you might want to have a couple of sessions with a coach or a therapist or your spouse or a friend, just to cheerlead you to get started. That's all it is. It's not deep thinking about your fear of success or something like that. It's just cheerleading you, injecting you with positive energy. Come on, you can do it, because you can do it. Believe me. If you've gotten to the point where you have a master's thesis opportunity, you can do it. And people far less skilled than you do it. And the reason, by the way, that you are resisting it is because you're so skilled, you know how good it could be and how hard it'll be to make it that good, and your perfectionism or your high standards slow you down. So you need to get a cheerleader, someone will say, come on, let's get going, even sit down with you and watch you write the first few lines, and then report back to that cheerleader, because the more you assess and measure and have check-in points, the more likely it'll get done. So a coach, a friend, a cheerleader, someone to hold you accountable, but accountable in the good way, so you can come in and brag, I did 10 pages. It's a great feeling. I use my wife for that, and I'll say, guess what, I'm up to page 39. She'll say, great, honey. And it makes a big deal difference to me.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. Tackling a giant project on your own is just a tough one for anybody. Much less, yeah. We have several questions here, from people who seem quite sad. I mean, they say things. This is a very typical one. I'm a 55-year-old woman who's been diagnosed with ADHD. I've been on medication for several years. I don't seem to be able to conquer my chronic lateness, procrastination, distractibility. I'm just not managing to break through and get things done as I think I should, despite the treatment. This is another one. I'm 54. These people are asking, am I on the wrong medication? Is there something being missed? What should I do next?
Well, you've taken the first step already by signing on to this webinar. See, that's really critical. And you're doing, what I say, the 3 steps. Never worry alone, get the facts, make a plan. Well, by joining the webinar, you're not worrying alone. And by submitting a question, even more, you're not worrying alone, which is huge. Give yourself a big pat on the back. Now, what you're facing is sort of the sea of negative energy that can come with ADHD. Your imagination turns on you, and you just imagine, how badly off you are, how badly you've done, how well other people have done, and it's very demoralizing. It really is. And so what you need is to connect. It's the best drug we've got. I call it the other vitamin C, Vitamin Connect. You need to connect with somebody, a therapist, a friend, a webinar, a group, a chat, what have you, where you can find positive energy. Because believe me, medication, as great as it can be, it's not just a matter of finding the right medication. Now, you might be on the wrong medication. I'm not saying that's not a possibility. It's a possibility. You want to make sure you've tried the right doses of all the available meds. But once you're satisfied you're getting the most mileage out of medication, now you're facing the process of learning new habits. And learning the habit of being less late, or learning the habit of do it now, one of my favorite sayings. And you might look into some other things you could do, like some nutritional changes or taking up the meditation. Don't discount that. And exercise, if you read John Rady's book, Spark, if you just exercise 3 or 4 times a week, I can promise you will improve not only in your physical condition, but in your executive functioning, in your memory, in your mood. But to do all that, you see, when you're in a negative place, it's the last thing you want to do. So if you were in my office, to whoever asked that question, I'd just say, tell me about the sadness, and I'd commiserate with you. It is sad. I've been there. I know what you're talking about, but you don't have to live there. Now, you're not going to leave this office and everything's going to be better. But we'll lay out a plan where 6 months from now things will be better, and that's a very legitimate goal. Not all better, like in my own life. It's certainly not all better. I've got a lot of things to work on, and I'm 62. But I keep working on them. I keep heading in the direction of hope, the direction of progress, the direction of learning what I can from other people and taking the positive steps, while at the same time I get bitten by the negative bug from time to time, and I go back to never worry alone, get the facts, make a plan. So I'm really glad you asked those questions. There are a lot of people out there with ADHD who aren't where they want to be and feel sad about it, like they're missing the parade, and you're not. You're on your way to the parade, but you just need to do it with the right other people who can provide you not only with the information, which is very important, but also with the positive energy to counteract your own tendency to get into negative places.
That's super helpful. That really does seem to be a pattern in the questions here. Here's another somewhat fun one. Both of my children and my husband have ADHD. I do not, says this person. Do you have any advice for me? My family has worn me down. How can I be patient with them and keep my own sanity?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think this is a time when a well-placed a few sessions with a family therapist can make a big difference, because you've got to get out of the role of carrying everything. They probably aren't even aware of how much you do for them. They'll say something like, well, I take out the trash. Isn't that half the work? And they'll mean it. And so you need to sit down with a referee, someone who can allow you to be heard. And then you just make up a new structure. You make up a new division of labor. You make up a new, and you post it on the refrigerator door or wherever. And then you let that do the nagging for you. So you get out of the role of chronic nag, chronic reminder, chronic wet blanket, and you let the agreed-upon rules, the agreed-upon expectations speak for you. Because you just can't do it. This is what leads to, if not depression, divorce, family breakup, chronic struggle. These families are often locked in what I call the big struggle, and every day it's just a big fight. And the same themes over and over and over again, and everybody just gets polarized and resentful. So, you could start with a book. Obviously I suggest my books, but there's plenty of others, and then find a good family therapist who can. They don't even really have to understand ADD, but they have to help people sort of reapportion, division of labor and allow for the venting of feelings and really educating the other members of the family as to how much you're carrying, because you just can't do it forever.
Right. That's very tough, isn't it? Yeah. It's an interesting question from Alec, who says he is an addict as well as a person with ADHD. He attends 12-step meetings and to deal with both his overeating and sort of under-earning issues, as he calls it, and debt issues. And he's just wondering what the intersection is between ADHD and addiction. He feels that that his sponsors are sort of, in denial about the impact of ADHD on addiction. Where do they begin? Where does one begin? Where does one end? And how does he best involve those people who are helping him with addictions on the ADHD issues?
Yeah, I use the analogy of most people with ADD have what I call an itch in their core. They have a feeling that they want to change their inner state. And, I call it, in my book, Delivered from Distraction, I have a whole chapter devoted to the itch at the core of ADHD. And it's not everyone with ADHD has this, but most people do. And you have this feeling of, I want to change my inner state. Some people call it the reward deficiency syndrome. It goes by other names, but I just think of it as an itch. And the question is, how do you scratch it? You can't make the itch go away. It's there. You have this feeling of, I want to change my inner state. How you scratch it makes all the difference in the world. Now, obviously, becoming an addict, that's a maladaptive way of scratching it. But it's why addictive problems are so common in people who have ADHD. They're trying to scratch the itch. And it works short term. Alcohol, marijuana, cocaine particularly, now gambling, sex, food, all of those will scratch the itch for a little while. But then the side effects are devastating, and so in the long term, it's obviously a highly maladaptive way of scratching the itch. But you're being driven to it, and that's where the 12-step people can agree. They say it's whatever it is, it's a disease, and that's fine, call it that. But I call it an itch, but it's on a biological basis is the point. It's not on a moral basis. It's not because you're a bad person. It's because you've got this itch, or the AA people would say disease, or whatever you want to call it, but it's rooted in biology, not in morality. And then you want to also find adaptive ways of scratching it. And the AA people are very wise on this. They say, if all you do is abstain, you're going to be white-knuckling it, is their phrase, and it's only a matter of time before you relapse. So you need to replace, the drug you've been misusing. And in AA, of course, it's the drug of fellowship. Well, that's a marvelous way to scratch the itch. I call it connection. I call it the other vitamin C. And that is a really healthy way of scratching the itch, and it really works. But it's got to be genuine connection. It doesn't mean access to the Internet. It means a real friendship, or a real love relationship, or a real support group, where you really feel that you're known and you can be real. And so another real good way of scratching the itch is physical exercise. Again, my friend John Rady has really nailed it. And, this is a great way to scratch that itch. If you exercise, you're not going to want to abuse drugs. You're going to just feel so different. And then the third way that I recommend highly is having some creative outlet. Whether it's growing a garden or trying to start up a business or run a magazine or write a book, some creative outlet that engages you over a period of time. And see, the beauty of that is you're working on it even when you're not working on it. When you've got a project going, it's always going. It's always there in your mind. So in a sense, the itch is always being scratched. And that's why I really encourage people with ADD to have some kind of creative project. It doesn't have to be in the arts. It can be a business. It can be a garden. But something that involves growth and something that involves daily sort of or regular tending to and that allows you to engage your creative energies. Those are three of the best ways I know of: connect, physical exercise, and a creative outlet to scratch the itch in adaptive ways. And keep going to your 12-step. That's great. Keep partaking of the drug of fellowship, and pretty soon you'll be you'll be in a much better place.
That's great. That's really great advice. A set of questions, if I can, Dr. Hallowell, about children and ODD. We have a number of people who are watching their kids, especially boys in both cases here, these two questions, develop ODD, and they're sort of puzzling over what's going on, and is this, are they being oppositional as a way to say that they can't follow through, that they're embarrassed to admit that, so they're being oppositional because of that, or what is the sort of psychology of this common development of ODD, and how should parents react to that in kids with ADHD?
ODD, for those who don't know it, is simply an acronym that stands for Oppositional Defiant Disorder, and it means, you know, kids who don't follow the rules. Now, the difference between ODD and ADD is volition. The ODD kids will plan to steal the apple off the desk when no one is looking. The ADD kid just steals the apple off the desk without any regard for who's looking. So one is impulsive and the other is planned. And now you can have both in the same kid, but it's an important distinction because the ODD is more difficult to deal with, and you need more of a team approach. And it does come back to, you know, behavioral interventions and setting limits and talking to the kid and, you know, helping them, you know, try to understand their actions, or even if they don't understand them, realize that their actions, you know, have consequences. And you can certainly find ODD and ADD in the same child, and in that case, the medication will help the ADD part, but it won't do much for the ODD part. That's more the behavioral.
And can you suggest any strategies for parents who are there are a number of people on the webinar who are having a really hard time getting kids to do homework, you know, with sort of pushback, rebellious behavior, especially early teens.
Say that again, Susan? There
are a number of people on the webinar who have teens, you know, late adolescent and late elementary, early sort of high school teens who are very rebellious and have very difficult to manage in terms of behavior, homework, bedtime, and those sorts of things.
Yeah, it part of that is simply, you know, adolescent stuff, and you know, adolescents go through a period of time where they disengage from their parents, and the peer group becomes far more important, and then they can start being disrespectful and breaking rules. And you know, you're treading a difficult line, because on the one hand you're having to enforce, you know, appropriate limits of behavior. On the other hand, you don't want to break off the good part of your relationship. So you want to understand this is pretty standard adolescent behavior. It's exasperating. It's difficult. You know, commiserate with your spouse or other parents. We've all been there. Have agreed upon limits and agreed upon standards, and you will get through it. You know, they will come back. But certainly work with a therapist. You know, if it starts getting severe, work with whatever resources you can muster. Most of the time, you know, in fact, all of the time, you can work with it and to get to a better place. But you know, these kids can get into a lot of trouble, and so you know, you want to have people there for you in terms of professional supports, personal supports, and you know, always know that all is never lost.
That's great. That's great. Here's Mitra, who's writes to say, first of all, that you are her hero, that she's learned more about ADD from you than from anyone else, and she's very grateful to you for all that you've written.
Thank you so much.
She has a son who is not hyperactive, is not rebellious, is just inattentive and sort of non-functional, and she says she wishes that he's just dropped out of college, sort of, you know, lying around the house, and she feels that, you know, hyperactivity would be an improvement, and she feels that there's actually very little information that she can find about sort of ADD without the hyperactivity, and she wonders if you have any comments on that.
Oh, absolutely.
Motivation,
absolutely.
I guess, motivation issues.
You know. Yeah, I mean, a lot of these really smart late adolescent, college age, post-college age folks. I have in mind someone right now who I'm seeing in my practice in Sudbury. They just kind of go into a state of lethargy, of lack of motivation, of they want to just sit, and play do electronics. Right. They know they have a lot of potential. They know they're very smart. They know they're wasting their talents. Their parents and friends even are exasperated with them, and they just kind of lie there and like a big beached whale or something. This is definitely a time when you want to get outside help, because if you just keep barking at them, get up, you're wasting your life, they're going to just keep not responding. So you need to build in some kind of program. And again, that's where you want to find this good professional we keep talking about as being so important. But you really do want to find that person, because, just to have a menu of options, a menu of ideas. What are the things we could do? And they range from going to something like a ropes program, or one of these outward bound type things, to finding a job, to starting a business. They could, once these people get motivated, believe me, the sky's the limit. So don't think they're going to be living in your basement when they're 35. They won't be. But you can't just sit there and watch them, do nothing. But instead of yelling at them, try to bring in somebody, and this is where you put your work into finding the somebody or the somebodies to help them get up and get moving.
Yeah,
and I found this is a place where I'm starting up a segment of my practice devoted to what I call PUED, problematic use of electronic devices, and I find that's where a lot of these folks go. The new diagnostic manual is going to have this as a condition, the DSM-5, but they're calling it Internet Use Disorder, which I think is unfortunate. First of all, the acronym is IUD,
right.
and second of all, it's not just Internet; it's all kind of electronics, and these things are really habit forming, and they're very soothing, and you just sit there, you can waste great chunks of time. So it's a not uncommon problem. I see it mostly in kids with ADHD who are particularly talented, which makes it all the more exasperating, because they're so much smarter than they're, it's exasperating to see them wasting their life. The other thing to be careful of, and this is one reason that I have no political or moral feelings about marijuana. Just as a clinician, I see time and time again people with ADD who smoke pot. That's all they want to do. They just want to get stoned. And the phrase they use is, "It helps me chill out." You might watch out for marijuana, and again, don't come at it as a moral or legal issue, but as just, this is not serving you well. This is not how you want to spend the rest of your life. And inaction begets inaction. A body at rest tends to stay at rest, so you've got a fair amount of inertia to overcome, and marijuana will only make that worse.
Absolutely, yeah. That's great. Gwen would like to know your suggestions for books that she might use to explain to her children who have ADHD what ADHD is and how they should sort of feel about it. She said she's had a hard time figuring out how to talk about it with her kids.
And do we know how old the kids are?
And they sound like they may be in elementary school.
Okay. The model that I use, and I find it works really, really well. Don't have to give them a book. Just describe to them the race car brain with the bicycle brakes.
That's a great analogy. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it really works well, and you see, it includes the strength. You've got this Ferrari engine, and it includes the problem. You've got bicycle brakes, and then it also allows for a non-shaming way of intervening when they misspeak or misbehave. You just say your brakes failed you instead of you bad boy or you bad girl. Say your brakes failed you. Oh yeah, I got to work on those brakes. I shouldn't that kid. I shouldn't have snatched that apple or what have you. And so they can buy into it. So they don't have to say, oh, I'm a bad person, and so feel shame. They can say, I got to work on those darn brakes, and so it's simple, it's accurate, it's very in keeping with the neuroscience, and it's something you can refer to over and over again. So I would just, and let them say, as we, let them know that when you strengthen your brakes, you're going to be a champion.
Yeah, that's great. That's terrific. Here's a question from Michelle, whose 8-year-old son has both ADHD and dyslexia. She said socially he does much better in one-on-one situations, but when they're inevitably in group situations, he tends to become the scapegoat or the kid that's picked on, and she's wondering what the best way to handle that is.
Social coaching.
Coaching, yeah.
Yeah, it's just, you kid with a reading problem, he needs tutoring. Well, the social problem, he needs tutoring also. And just sit down with him. You can do it yourself. You can do it at the dining room table. How do you behave in a group? Don't interrupt. Make eye contact. Listen. Don't kick. Don't bully. Don't be bossy. I mean, just the basics you got to practice it over and over again because they'll sit and nod and not hear a word you're saying. So you have to almost let it become a mantra. Can I go into a group? I won't say a word for the first minute. Or when someone asks a question, I won't be the first to answer. So you have to squelch some of their enthusiasm. But you have to let them know that other kids, they don't want someone to be a boss. They don't want someone to be pushy. They don't want you to, try to get your way all the time. And it's just a matter of coaching. Obviously, you want to make sure the ADD is treated too. I mean,
right. What's your feeling about social? There are groups that some parents have described to us where you can actually enroll your child in a group for social to learn social behavior.
Yeah, those are good. And there's another one called Think Social that this woman in California, Michelle Winner, has she's written these great manuals on, and she has these seminars around the country. I've become friends with a practitioner in the Boston area called Nancy Clements, and it's really good. She's really honed down the methods. It takes time, but Think Social.
Think Social. Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Hallowell, you have been so wonderful to spend so much time and to address so many individual questions. Is there anything we're going to close here in a couple of minutes? Are there any last words you'd like to
Sure.
So encouraging.
Yeah, I would start. I would close where I began and say, this is what we need to be doing to pool what we know, but not only what we know, but our reservoirs of hope and positive energy. Because really, when things slow down in the world of ADHD, it's usually because of you're getting low on hope and positive energy. So, then you take the knowledge and you use it, and you don't expect instant results. It does take time, but as long as you're in the direction of progress, you're going to feel good, and you're going to like I said, I'm still working at it, but and we all are. Life is never easy, but we all keep working on it, banding together, and you can turn this interesting condition that can be so disastrous into something that can also be a wonderful ally and asset in your life. And also just to thank you, Susan, and Attitude for the spectacular work you do. It's really wonderful.
We love it, and we're just very grateful to all of you who have been willing to take part in these webinars. And I think that there's just huge interest and need for support out there. So what you do is really important. Thanks, everyone, for participating, and thanks again.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.